The object that I have chosen to explore is the whalebone corset found in the Finders Keepers gallery at the RAM. To me, corsets are an icon of the Victorian era. I find Victorian ideals in society fascinating, particularly the wearing of corsets given the pressure on the female body image and the medical dangers of lifelong wear. So what about this corset? Well, there was quite a fashion for collecting dress in the 1950s and 1960s, which is when the collection at the RAM began to develop. But it is unclear who donated this corset. It does, however, have a marker's label which reveals that it was made by a corseteer in Watford between 1870 and 1880. Therefore, this corset would have been custom-made for the original wearer. When we think of corsets, we tend to think of upper middle-class women wearing them, as they were associated, then and now, with high status and wealth. In actual fact, working-class women often wore them as well. They wore corsets in an attempt to advance their social position, but they tended to wear jumps, which were designed to be worn more loosely and so allow for mobility, as ultimately working-class women would have been working, and so needed to be able to move. Thus, the practice of tight-lacing was reserved for the middle class. Tight-lacing was the process by which corsets were tightened on the wearer in order to achieve a smaller waist and a more desirable figure. Such corsets were tied at the back, and so it would require the help from a household servant, another indicator of class implied by tight-laced corsets. If working-class women could not afford to buy professionally made corsets like this one, they could make their own. There was in fact a large amount of dressmaking text that provided instructions on how to make corsets, showing how essential they were to female dress as a whole in the period. You could even buy pre-cut whalebones from the local haberdashers. It is perhaps important to note here that whalebones were not actually bones from whales, but their teeth. Nevertheless, as time progressed and whales became protected species, metal rods replaced whalebones in strengthening the shape of corsets. Corsets were highly debated by the scientific community at the time, and it is interesting to consider the clear medical dangers of corset wearing, particularly tight-lacing. One argument was that constant wear of corsets from a young age acted to compress vital organs and make women more susceptible to disease, whereas other physicians argued that support was necessary for the female form. This medical debate filtered down into the advertising, with corset advertisements taking on medical scientific stances for legitimacy that upheld ideas that corsets were good for your health. There was even an electric corset that emerged, where strips of metal were magnetised to generate a health-giving current to the whole system. Corsets were also worn by pregnant women, which is increasingly surprising. They were worn to hide their pregnancy, as the image of pregnant women was shunned by society. Interestingly, the medical community had little to say on this issue, perhaps because pregnancy was a social taboo, as a clear reminder of the carnality of women and the removal of female innocence. In terms of the female body image, it clearly gives the impression of a perfect figure that all women were to strive for. This sparks questions such as, was it attainable, and whose image of perfection was it? Often images from the time show women with impossibly small waists. Some historians suggest that women ideally wanted to have a waist the same size as their age of marriage, and most women aged to marry before they were 20, so this means incredibly small waists. It could be argued that corsets represented a male imagination of perfection enforced on women, and certainly the corset industry was dominated by men in the period. So why did women wear them then? Well, there were essential pieces of clothing that gave ideas of wealth and breeding. This brings us back to the ideas of class, which were no doubt essential to corset wearing. Women wore corsets either to advance their social standing or to uphold their class. It was, after all, the fashion of the era. Ultimately, fashion is still a large part of the modern world, and we can question whether the image of female perfection is any different today. It may not be about corsets anymore, but the drive for perfection of the female form is certainly still evident in today's society.